Hello everybody, Volen here, in pursuit of art. What we're going to talk about this week is we're going to pretty much continue on from where we left off last week. Last week we talked about being a beginner, what that means, what you need to think about, and what questions you need to ask yourself to be able to improve as fast as possible. Just a quick recap. As a beginner, your main goal, your main job is to figure out what is the big picture and where am I right now? How is what I'm doing helping me to move me towards that big picture? How does it all integrate together? Which piece am I working on right now? So now in this video, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna talk to you more about the big picture. I just want to quickly also throw in there that reading your guys' comments really helps me because it lets me understand and see parts of the problems that I'm actually not able to see, right? I only have one head. I look at images, I look at problems through just my own perspective. So I knew that when I made the video last week, when I didn't give you the big picture, when there wasn't too much information, I knew that that would obviously be a problem for people. But then I also got a question about someone said that they are not really sure where they are at the moment or how to find out. So reading your guys' comments and you giving me questions really helps me out a lot because it gives me materials for new videos, helps me understand you guys better, and it helps me give you what you guys are looking for. So please, whenever you have something for me, please don't be afraid to share it. It's never too long. I will always read it, even if I don't have time to respond with a lengthy answer. I'll just save it for another video. So thank you for that. Okay, now having a look at the big picture. I do want to say that this refers to 2D art. So basically what that means is that it's representational. You have an image that you're looking at and you're trying to translate that to either copy it or to just make a painting of it, whatever that may be, stylizing it in whatever way that you wish. So this has to do with the fact that you're working from an image. You're not just trying to pull this out of your head, 3D, or creating something, designing something works in a pretty much very different way. 2D art is still part of the skill set, is definitely applicable, but it's a different discipline. So that'll need to be covered in its own video. So for this vid, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna give you an overview of the big picture. I'm gonna share with you, in my opinion, what makes an image realistic. What are the core essentials that you need to focus on? What are those things that you need to spend the most time on? So giving you that big picture so then you can find out where it is that you stand at the moment. What do you need to work on right now? How will that feed into the next thing that you need to do? And how those working all together are going to give you that final realistic picture that you're after. So this video is only the overview. I'm only just giving you the image of the big picture. Then I'm going to make separate videos and I'm going to break off all of those things that I'm going to cover. Each one is going to be its own video. So I'm going to make a video on accuracy of how to get accurate shape, how to get accurate value, accurate colors, transitions or edges, then some rendering, the tool use, the layering strategies for the rendering. Everything that I'm going to cover right now is going to have its own video. So this is just so you know the process and are better informed when you're trying to think of what to do next. So essentially what I want to do with this video is give you guys a good understanding of what it would take to take an image like this and do a study of it. So essentially, what would you need to do to be able to faithfully reproduce the image that you see? To create realism, what are those core essentials that you need to have in your work? And again, this refers to 2D. So what do we need to do to translate this image over to our study? So I've tried to separate this whole process of creating a realistic image in two main components, accuracy and rendering. Accuracy is concerned with faithful translation of good observation of what is it that you're going to be doing exactly. What are its main facets? What's the geometry underneath the object? What are the key points that you need to get correct? Those are all things that are incredibly important. They are normally under the surface, and that's why we ignore them. A lot of times with beginners, what we do when we first start out is that we just want to get to the rendering part, because rendering is what people actually get to see. That's pretty much the final effect, is that you go for the rendering. So when we're beginners, when we just want to get an effect, when we're just desperately trying to find out if this thing is going to work out or not, we don't want to invest too much time in the setup underneath, we just go straight for the rendering because that's the only thing that you can see. So we try to work on the parts that people will be able to see. Problem with that is though, is that if your accuracy is off, if you don't have that initial setup that's all done correctly, then no matter how much you render and how well your skills are developed in that, it's not going to help save the piece, because accuracy is pretty much the map. Accuracy is the map that you're going to be using to then translate the surface coding on top of what you've put there. So basically accuracy is the map, and then rendering is just covering the map with, this is going to be like the tree area, this is going to be the pond, this is going to be the building that's going to be there. It's actually putting those things in place, but without the map, without the architectural plan of what's this going to look like, it's just not going to work. Your pool, your little lovely swan pond is going to be on top of the cafe, which is going to be on top of the alligator cage, which is then going to be in the monkey zoo, and then the monkeys are going to be throwing ice creams at everyone, and all the people are going to be stuck in the monkey cages because after they walk in, they immediately just get locked into this system thing that you've just designed that really shouldn't have been there in the first place. So really the whole thing hinges on the map, on the invisible stuff that we normally ignore. Hence why there's about 4 things for accuracy and very little really in terms of rendering, because most people are probably technically a bit more familiar with rendering rather than accuracy. Let's quickly have a look at these step by step. And again, next videos are going to cover and break those down into longer vids and just show you more of what the process is actually. So let's have a look at these and see how they work together. Accuracy and rendering aren't actually separated when you're working. They go together, but we're separating them for convenience. You could have a step-by-step process to get a painting done, but for the majority of the demos that you most likely would have seen, or for more experienced artists, they're most likely using very little in what you can see in terms of accuracy. They might measure something here and there, so they might be checking angles, they might do this from time to time, but for the most part, the really most experienced painters, they would almost do it on the fly, which to the beginner gives you the illusion that they're not measuring at all. It's actually, they are measuring, it's just that their measurement system in their brain is so much more developed than ours that they just almost do it on the fly. I remember when I was first starting out, I would message artists and ask them, I didn't see you measure anything, I didn't see you do a line drawing, how did you do it? And they said, I stopped doing that years ago. But what that meant is that they also did it for years before they got to drop it 4 years afterwards. So you do need to go through the step-by-step process to get to the point where you do it on the fly. So again, these are constantly interacting with each other, but let's break them down so we can have a look at them. A quick overview. Accuracy is concerned at all times with getting everything to be as close as possible to the original because we are copying. So we're evaluating constantly. Are we putting everything in the correct place? Is it the right shape? Is it drawn with the correct value or color? So is my color or value correct with the shape that I've put? So you can see that even those are constantly interacting as well. When you're actually painting, or if you're shading, if you're using a pencil, when you're rendering form in any way, value and color are what actually define the shapes that you'll be doing. So even they go backwards and forwards constantly. But you can also separate them when you're troubleshooting, and you can say, is my shape correct? If my value and color are correct, is my shape then correct? And I'll show this with an example in just a minute. And the final one is transition. Transition refers to basically what would traditionally be called edges. I don't like calling them edges because when it's explained to me as edges and then I see all the different types of edges, I almost think of it as arbitrary. Like, oh yeah, sometimes you can have a lost edge, a found edge, and you need to sort of vary them to make it interesting. That could be an artistic way to do it, but what edges actually are is they're the intersection of a form. So how do two shapes, two form planes go together? Again, you'll see that in a second with an example. And I've made a sort of acronym for you. So again, accuracy is concerned with getting everything in the right place, being the right shape, in the right value, or the right color, and having the transition between those shapes be the correct sharpness or softness. That's really all it takes for it to get done. You get to see that, I hope, very clearly with an example. So I've made a little acronym for you guys to remember this better. And I've moved these because actually when you're doing the shape, you're doing it in value and color, so it makes more sense to list them in that order. But the acronym is LSTV. So LSTV, location, shape, transition, value. Location, shape, transition, value. If at any time when you're painting, if you're keeping in mind, is it in the right place? Is it the right shape? Is it the right value? And is the transition between those value shapes, is it the correct softness, the correct hardness? If you get those right, you will never not get a realistic result. There isn't really anything but those 4 things that you need to get correct. Rendering afterwards is pretty much, once you know that everything is in place, it's applying the surface. It's using value and color, it's using shape, and it's using tools now to apply those where they need to go. So it's using, if it's traditional, your palette knife, your brushes, or when you're in digital, it's using the correct tool. Would it be the pen tool? Would it be the brush? Which brush would you use? A lot of people get stuck constantly in clicking, checking tick boxes, etc. A lot of times it's the simplest solution is the best one. Is it a soft edge? Is it a hard edge that I'm trying to reproduce? Is there a gradation? Is it just a flat tone? What's the best tool to use? And then layering. When you're rendering, when you're creating a complex surface, most often you will have to figure out the sequence of how to apply the paint. When you have your shapes, again, when your accuracy is checked, when you know where your shapes are going to go, the location, everything is all set up, you've observed the colors, the values, you know what you're going for, you then need to figure out what sequence do I put this in. So if you have like a complex tone, do you first put down a base? Do you just go for the final effect? Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. So what is the layering that you need to figure out? The sequence of those layers of paint that you'll be applying to get that realistic final surface. Let's have a look at some examples now. So this is called an Asaro head, and this is from a couple of years ago. And basically, what I'm showing you right now is that this is my study of accuracy. So before I start applying any sort of surfacing, this is just the base geometry of what I'm doing. So I'm trying to find out where are those points that I need to put to make this look correct. What's the location of all the major elements that are going to go into this thing? So it would be, let's say the silhouette would be a very important one to get the location of all the points correct, to make sure that it reads right. Those would be major points. So location. Second one, shape. Fortunately, because this is an easy study, the shapes are pretty much defined by those points. If you have a more complex study though, something like this, where forms are all transitional, barely any hard edges to be defined, then shapes that you're actually looking for become those color shapes that are inside of those hard points. So for instance, when I'm actually doing a study of this, I'm looking for, let's say, the point of the eyebrow, those well-defined edge points that I can find. So I can, let's say, measure this out fairly accurately, but all of those shapes around here, they're going to be color shapes. And if you did have to measure all of those out, you might take, let's say, 50 years to complete it. So you normally just, with your brush, you are going for those color shapes that you see and blending them together. Those would be the transitions. Going back to this study again now, when the location of my points is fairly accurate, I then move on to putting in the shapes with value and color. So I've done this a couple times, and here we go. I've done this a couple different times because you will have to do this over and over to get better at it. I've done almost everything that I've done over the years. I've done at least 4, 5, 6, 10 times, however many times it took. So with this one, you can see that once the location of my points was found and determined, so I know I have a good base, the points are in the right place, then I can go to the next step to start rendering. If they weren't in the right place, then I would be rendering and I might be spending hours on this step of just putting everything in the right place, the right shape, the right color, the right value, the right transition, etc. But if they're not initially in the right location, then it's going to fail. It's going to be rendered perfectly, but it's not going to have the likeness that I'm going for. And you can see that there are some discrepancies. As you do this more and more, you get better. But as a beginner, you just have to expect some mistakes. Like, they're just going to happen because you just can't handle all the information that you have to work with. You build it slowly, just like a muscle, over time. So even with your best effort, you might still have a mistake here and there, but that's fine. The more you do it, the better you'll get. And the more on the fly you'll be able to do all this stuff. So after my location is sort of established of all the major points, I know that I have a fairly good base to work with. I start putting in shapes with value and color. Once that is done, I evaluate the transitions. Transitions would refer to those shapes, those plane changes, and then the actual interaction between them. So you can see over here, the edge is slightly soft, so it's not a perfectly machined edge. Where you can see on my study, my edge looks more like it was almost perfectly cut. This is a common thing that happens in 3D renderings. You get to see that a lot. You can see it even here, it's even sharper. So I haven't really managed to capture that transition very well. I could have softened it a bit. At the time, I probably didn't have the right tool used to do it. I probably also wasn't able to think of all those things at the same time. So again, allow for some mistakes. Moving on to a more complex study, you can see there's almost no hard edges here. So everything is pretty soft, transitions all around everything. A better way to show transition is using this image. So you can see on the human form, on anatomy, pretty much no sharp transitions anywhere, no sharp edges, because everything is a form that flows and has a roundness to it. So everything just goes around. And a quick final word on rendering before I start making those videos over the next couple weeks explaining more about these. Rendering, you can see over here, what I talked about earlier about rendering, about the layering of rendering, is that you have to determine what layers am I going to put in first. You have to determine how am I going to layer those different tones that I need to have overlapping to give me the final effect. You can see an early stage of this painting. You can see I have some basic blocked colors in, but obviously there's a lot more detail on everything. So I have to determine what are going to be some good choices that I can then use as a base to put all the different tones on top of. So you can see, especially with the dogs, you can see this one started as just a flat silhouette, a flat, almost reddish sort of tone that very little of it remains in the actual final piece. But I could start with it first to just get my silhouette in there so I can see if it's in the right place, the right location, etc. Double check again, even while you're rendering, you can still again be checking accuracy. They do go together. Once it's in there, I can then have a look and just think, I have this base tone, which is pretty dark. I can then start laying in the light area over here. So I probably, after I had that dark shape in there, I probably started adding in the light tones. After I added the light tones, then I start putting those patches in. Then I might also go and just erase out, add back in, etc. So that's like 4 or 5 layers. And I don't mean like Photoshop layers. I mean actual, which base layer of paint do I start with first, then which tone do I add on top of it, then which tone do I add on top of it. And it doesn't have to do with the actual surface. Like for instance, where the dog is missing its fur over here, because it goes in, it doesn't mean that I put that in first because it's like deepest. I actually put in the base tone, then I can put in the fur, then I can put that in. It's actually figuring out how should I put the shapes one on top of the other to make this as easy as possible. A final quick recap of what we just talked about. Making realistic images. 2 components, accuracy and rendering. Get everything in the correct place, in the right shape, using the right value or the right color. So basically you're first drawing it just with either line or just finding out where those critical points that you need to get. If it's a portrait, where would the eye go? Where would the nose go? Measure the proportions out. Get all those things in place. So then using your actual painting tools, you apply paint, you apply value or color using shape now. So you draw with shape yet again. And then once you manage to also get the transitions of all those various small little shapes, once they're interlocking with each other properly, once the transitions between them, the different tones, the different colors are correct, that's all that it takes. The final thing that remains is just actually figuring out the layering. Which one would you put first? Would you have a dark base, a light base, a color base, a value base? What would you do? How would you layer those together to make it as efficient as possible so you don't have a lot of backwards and forwards? Basically, the whole point of this stuff is just how to make something look like a thing. So when you're doing 3D art, especially if you're a beginner, what you're trying to do is you're only trying to just make something that you're doing using your tools, using your current skill level, just make it look like a thing. That's a big deal. Once you can do that, then you can move over and start actually understanding the underlying geometry, how to design stuff, what would go together, how would it work, how can you distort it, how can you change it, how does light affect it, what are the planes of it, etc., etc., etc. But your first step is just, how do I make something look like a thing? If it's an Asaro head, how does it look like an Asaro head, rather than just a weird, creepy little bump that I created and it sucks. Okay, that's it. So I realize this video might leave you sort of scratching your head, not fully grasping what it is that I'm trying to show you yet. But that's okay, because this video is just an overview. So hopefully, as I break down each individual component more and more, show you how to practice it, and then maybe you can come back to this video, have a look at it again, and seeing how the whole process works together, will hopefully make more sense. So it's just like doing a picture in that sense. Sometimes you look at it for so long, you can't possibly see it. You're not really sure what you're looking at anymore. You leave it, you go to only parts of it, you detail out an area, zoom back out, have a look at the big thing. So maybe come back to this video as you get to see all the different aspects of it explained more and more, and hopefully it'll make more sense then. I'll be honest with you, it's definitely gotten me to scratch my head quite a few times, re-recorded this many times, and probably spent the most amount of time so far in trying to make a video because I'm just trying to condense it, make it as simple as possible, but also try and show you that it's still important though. Just because it's simple doesn't mean that it's gonna be simple to acquire. It's like they say, sometimes some things are 5 minutes to understand and a lifetime to master. So I'm just trying to give you the simple idea of how to do all this stuff, and then the practice is up to you. And the understanding of it, it goes hand in hand with the practice. So as you put these in practice, as you see them more and more, as you get new information and you get to see more of what you look at, when you look at things in the world and you see it with new eyes because of the new information that you have, hopefully this will serve to help you, to open up your eyes to new ways to think about simple or complex things. As always, please send me your questions. They give me a lot of material to work with, and they help me make videos that are more useful to you. Please like and share if this helped you in any way. It helps the channel and it helps me. It helps bring more people to it, so then we can help more people out. Thank you very much for watching. See you next week.